Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello, everyone.
Great
Hello.
to see you.
Hello,
You
hello.
too.
Nice to see you.
Hi, Doc.
Hello.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Been There, Done That, Bought the T-shirt. My name's Krishna Istha, and I'm chatting to Laura Bridgeman, or Dr. B, or Doc, and Serge. Hi, Doc. Hi, Serge.
Hi.
Hello, hello, hello.
I was thinking the other day while prepping for this how a lot of young trans people and I'm not that young anymore, but a lot of trans people my age and younger have this idea that we're the first trans people to do something, so the first trans person to be on TV, the first trans people to be parents, first trans person on moon, etc. Obviously that hasn't happened yet, but someday.
Yeah,
But I was
not
thinking
yet.
about how I'm really thankful that I met both of you when I was quite young, and I had oral histories from both of you and from the other Drakes. And I feel like that changed my perception of what trans history is and what creating trans art is. It's never for the first time, but we have this assumption that it is. So firstly, I just want to say thank you for being legends and for being my queer family. Do both of you remember the first time you saw a trans person or a gender non-conforming person for the first time?
I suppose for me, before seeing the drag kings in the mid 90s that were starting to also experiment with testosterone, there was before that my sense of seeing gender non-conforming bodies in performance art and in, say, Ron Athy's companies. I would see naked bodies that I could also perceive as being gender non-conforming
In the 90s?
in the mid 90s.
And what happened from there? How did that change you from seeing that work?
It meant to me a glimpse into something that was not medical transition view and based. So it was good for me with my queer gaze to start to recognize gender non-conforming and trans in a body, in a being, in a person, in a performance that wasn't based on transition medical route.
What about you, Doc?
Yeah, I mean, I think around the same sort of time, I was just kind of conscious because I was sort of working in First Out at the time, which was the only openly gay and lesbian cafe. And I was working with Simon Casson and Amy LeMay, and I remember kind of, we were all serving cappuccinos and warming up quiches and stuff. And at the time they were saying that they wanted to set up this performance club and they were going to do it in South London. They were going to take over the RVT. And I just laughed at them and I said, well, that's going to last 5 minutes. And then, of course, we cut to today where that club has been going, I don't know, 25, is it 25 years, 23, 25 years, something like that. So it just, I think, and Serge was one of the founder members of First Out. And so Serge was in and around that conversation. So I was aware of Serge and knew Serge, not that intimately and not that closely. And then we didn't have contact for a while. And then I bumped into Serge in the Sainsbury's supermarket in the Angel.
Post
And we were
surgery.
just, yes, post-surgery, that's right. And I remember going up to post-top surgery for Serge.
What
And I
year
remember
was
going
it?
up, what year? I don't know, it was felt like,
2000, 2001.
okay, so it was later then. And I went up to Serge and I said, I know you've transitioned, I don't know what your new name is. And we had this conversation by the fruit and veg stand in Sainsbury's. And Serge said, my name is Serge. And it was just like this amazing moment. I went to give him a hug because I also have a French friend called Serge. So I went to give him a hug. And then Serge said, please don't, I've just had top surgery. So it just felt like those conversations were quite, at the time, felt quite, sort of quite left field. and still there wasn't. I mean, now it just feels like the conversation's moved on so much, and it feels much more mainstream, and there's a larger kind of cultural context around trans and non-normative bodies and people that are gender non-conforming. But I mean, if you're saying it's that sort of date, Serge, 2001, I mean, it feels like an age ago. And I think that's right, Chris, is kind of a good point to say that sort of the testament is these bodies are still standing, these bodies are still making work, these bodies are still coming into the cultural kind of conversation. And I think it's a really nice kind of framing in terms of this project to have this sort of sense of not the baton passing down, but the baton just being passed around. And actually, age becomes just a number because these cultural conversations are happening in this framework. And does it really matter that there are 30 years between us or 40 years between us? It's good for us, and I guess the sort of the interface is positive for all. Yeah.
I was also thinking about a conversation the other day, how we were talking about how personal is politics, performance, and how the first time I met you, Doc, or saw you was at Ducky, a gay shame, maybe 7 years ago.
I think that was 2014. Yes.
Yeah. And also how a couple of years ago I was looking up any sort of information online about naked trans bodies on stage because I was developing my practice and that's where my practice was going. And I remember I didn't find a lot, but one of the only things I found, I was reading this chapter in a book and they were talking about this show called Full Monty, and there were
F2M Full Monty.
FTM Full Monty, and there were a couple of trans mass people who were stripping, and there were things going on. And I was like, hold on a second, these names, it was Jay, Serge, Jason maybe? And I was like, I know these people, this is amazing. It was written by Catherine McNamara. And I want to know more about that.
Well, this was 2005, our start of our infamous events that were fundraising for Transfabulous, the arts festival that ran annually 2006 to 2008. But in 2005, we didn't know we were going to be successful with our Arts Council and our lottery bids. And so we knew we had to feed our audience with anticipation of what was to come, but with no idea about how we were going to pull it off. And one of our ideas was we were building an association with Bethnal Green and Oxford House, where we became producers in residence. And we did an event at the Pleasure Unit, and it was called The Night of Tall Women and Short Men. And one of the shows that night was the F2M Full Monty. And I'm sure that Jason and I believed that we were going to have young bucks come up and volunteer their services to be strippers in terms of being a known format that they would easily be able to step into. But no one did. So it then had to be us, whatever we thought. So Jason, myself, Jay, and Hamish. And that night we had nowhere to change because the bar was full and packed. There was nowhere for us to go. So we had to go outside in the street to a car to strip, to then put our strippers' clothes on to be able to come back in. And we hadn't thought of having the need for a stripper's license. And the council came to stop us and said we had no license. We argued the case that there would be no male genitals being stripped down to, as though we could talk our way out of though we were not going that far. But it wasn't that we were not going that far, it was that we were not bearing what they maybe thought we were going to bear. And the management of the Pleasure Unit, with a full house, a really raucous house already, was saying, we don't care, you're going to have to go ahead, we'll pay the fine. It'd be better for you to pay the fine, us to pay the fine, go ahead with the show, and just do it, because this night is going to go down, like a bomb. And it fucking did. It was an amazing, amazing experience to be a part of, but also it went down in history and the build-up of our infamous events building up to the festival. Yeah.
And it's so amazing because I feel like people think that trans arts festivals are like a thing that happens now. Even Kate and I were talking about this, how Trans Fabulous is an inspiration behind Trans Vegas and other festivals. And it's just amazing to know that all of that happened. Is there archives of it? Is there stuff online?
We've handed over the Trans Fabulous archive to the LGBTQ archive at Bishopsgate. So they will have not only props, they'll have our printed ephemera, they'll have our website as well. And they will have some pictures, some naked stripping pictures, and they were for a while on the website, but we were getting a phenomenal amount of interest. And I think I even recall a partner of someone had been caught sort of looking at it something like hundreds and hundreds of times. So there was something in terms of their joy at looking at it, not that it's a shame. And so I would like to return to the naked body in our conversation and the naked trans body and the power of that, because that was my interest as well. So I have other things to say about trans nakedness in performance. Yeah.
Okay, we'll come back to that. Doc, what about you? When did you start making work? And because I know you went for acting parts, you were doing things. What was
my kind of trajectory is I went to drama school, and I came out of drama school in 1990 and was going up for acting jobs. So, you know, back in the day, there were no mobile phones, nobody had websites, everything kind of was a bit, you know, it's just a bit more sort of tangible in that way. So you've got jobs. I got a number of jobs kind of like hearing about auditions. I remember Ursula Martinez dragged me down to an audition at the ICA about and Ursula would remember this audition. It was a guy from Belgium came over, and he just wanted you to stand on stage and recount a text like a list, like a shopping list. So I used to hear things sort of word of mouth. I was quite engaged with Gay Sweatshop at the time, and Lois Weaver and James Neil Kennelly had taken over the company, and they were starting to do sort of micro performances and one-off events, and then I became part of that sort of cultural conversation in a way. And I did a piece of, again, down at the ICA. The ICA was quite a big performance space, and people used to go and see a lot of work there and produce work there. I did my first solo piece there called Exit the Advert, which was about a young butch person trying to kind of forge their way in the world. And it felt at the time that, you know, people were just emerging and just starting to make work. So Robert Pesiti was out making work. Ursula was starting to make work. Michael Atavar was making work. Marissa Karneski was making work. So we were all sort of part of this little kind of, we kind of knew of each other, and we were around kind of sort of the same sort of performance and performing arts scene, if you like. So around those interfaces, we would hear about jobs and go up for things. But I think in general, if you know, I was kind of androgynous butch identified, there were no parts at all. So good luck with that. I went up for a part at a festival at the Old Red Lion, which is a sort of pub theatre in Islington. And that was to go up for a female part. And they saw me and they decided to change the whole cast into females also playing the male part. So I actually got a cast in what originally would have been a male part, but they addressed it and had a fit. It was Polly Thomas who did that show, who's now works for the BBC up in Manchester. So she just said, I'm going to use all female performers and make them take over the male roles. So little bits of slippage were happening in that way. But I still think it's rubbish. If you're an androgynous or you're a butch performer, it's rubbish. It's awful. There are no parts out there because, you know, it's very risk adverse. And, you know, we could talk about, you know, Lea Delaria or Gentleman Jack, or it's like how many parts per year are being allocated for, you know, butch presenting actors or performers, kind of nothing really. So my way forward was to start making work, and then the writing took off, and then that evolved, yeah.
And how did you both start writing and making work together as a company?
Serge, do you want to, because it was Serge's brain.
I suppose we were overlapping in being part, and I was co-producer of Trans Fabulous with Jason Barker, but Dr. B was in on that as part of the festivals and as well. And we were talking about what next, and we had an idea, or I had an idea that I wanted to do something like a verbatim monologue style, like the Vagina Monologues, but from trans mask worlds. So the Trans Mangina Monologues was my idea, and we even wrote to seek permission to do this, but we didn't need to. So yeah, it was the start of us collecting stories with the idea that they could be not just about a sort of linear narrative, but it could be that you're going back to look at childhood. You're looking at sexuality. You're looking at how you're growing into your skin. So it was, but it was from the trans mask perspective that seemed to be missing at the time, when there was much more trans feminine work coming out. At that time.
Yeah, and I think as well, so, I remember Serge inviting me around to the apartment. We were sitting on his sofa and he said, I've got this idea. And when he framed it like that, a version of the Vagina Monologues, but using, trans mask voices, and I just looked at him and I said, that I think that's the best thing anyone's ever said to me. So, and it was a sort of a good fit for us, because Serge had all the contacts, obviously, from the community and people that we could readily interview, because I felt at sort of a level of kind of displacement, because it isn't necessarily my voice. And Serge said, but you have a writing background, so your theatre background. And I think we were quite sweet and generous to write to Eve Ensler and say, is it okay if we do? And she wrote back and she said, yeah, it's a great idea, but can you change the title? She wasn't very happy with Trans Mangina Monologues. And then we just kind of forgot about her letter and just went on with it anyway. But yeah, it felt like a really nice fit, and it was very much in this spirit, which I think we're touching on in these various conversations. It was just kind of a bit gung-ho. You just had an idea and you just kind of went for it. And that really felt like the spirit of the times, and maybe because there wasn't this tracking and tracing on social media, you could kind of just create something and invent something out of that space, and it didn't really matter if it kind of didn't quite work out, because nobody could sort of follow you forever online. But it was a great project, and it was, and I think what Serge is touching on as well, we kind of came under the understanding that trans mask guys and performers were making solo work, but there wasn't this sense of a collective experience and body, going back to the bodies on stage. And when we did it first down at Queen Mary University, went to Soho Theatre, people were just blown away that you've got 5 trans guys walking on stage, owning the space. And yeah, it was very, very, very empowering and uplifting.
Definitely the collective of the collective voices that were more than 5, but 5 people taking on the voices, and when you're performing it, everyone thinks the words that are coming out are yours, where it's not. It's a collective verbatim collection, and it was really, really powerful at the time, and powerful to be in, powerful to perform, and to see the audience response. It was there was nothing like it at the time.
Talking about trans bodies on stage, to come back to you, Serge, and I want to know more about you being in Franco B's work, and I'm trying to form the right question. I think what I'm trying to ask is, did being naked on stage change your relationship to your body or to your transness in any way?
I think I was always I've not been inhibited since transition started, in terms of I've been much more freer in a body that was mine to inhabit, with my skin tight to my body, has felt good. And I have felt that either being sort of naked in works, or seeing naked trans and gender non-conforming people is a bearing witness. And so whether it's either we're bearing and we're bearing it in terms of our gaze or doing the work. There's something there about saying, we're here, we're naked, we exist. You can't say we don't exist. It's really, really powerful. And part of Transfabulous was also that we encourage nakedness within our festival parties. We also had an ethical sex club as part of the festival. And then later on, my sort of volunteering to be on Franco B's durational piece on the swing, naked, within an art gallery, was for me important because it was at a point of being mid-surgeries where things were incomplete but very visible. And the other things about being very visible is when you have phalloplasty surgery, you're as big as you're going to be all the time. You don't, you don't have a flaccid state. So when you're naked, people can't help but stare and wonder and whatever. So being on Franco's B swing with the classical music and having a full audience in the gallery was very, very empowering for me. And I was very, very glad to be one of the many people that took part in that durational piece where Franco invited people to be on the swing that he normally takes the space in. So definitely what I'd seen in performance art in the past to do with queer and HIV and gay bodies, in terms of queer or gay bodies, in terms of that bearing witness side of things, I felt strongly about and still do. And I'm not sure whether, I think my stripping career is over now.
Hi.
We'll hold you to that, Serge.
Maybe we can do an FTM Full Monty strip, the second version.
I love it.
The original people, but also me and Eli and like
Yes,
Tyler and stuff like that.
yes.
And I think also we've even gravitated away from original language, so we wouldn't anymore use F2M, but it fitted at the time with the play on words.
Yeah.
The same way when we did the puppetry of the phalloplasty. So we were playing on popular culture to create small sketches. And I love all that. I love short pieces that have effect like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, talking about short pieces and creating things that are like short form, I feel like that's very like queer performance, in the sense I feel like a lot of the performers I know who make theater or queer bigger stuff often come from cabaret. You're used to making like short form stuff. That's just something that works for us for some reason. And Doc, I was wondering whether, because you've got a series of different texts that are monologues and like short form. What are they called? A collection? I don't know what book terms are. Is that what it's called?
Oh, what for the transvaginas or the butch monologues, or yes, yeah, like a collection of stories, yeah.
Yeah, and what gravitated you towards that form? Because you've got quite a few different books of that.
Yeah, I think a number of different things. I think just to go back to the transvaginas, when we were first taking interview, we didn't really know. We just started to take interview. We didn't really know how we were going to use it. And it's always the same. And when I teach in universities, I tell students, it's like, you can start making the project and start making the work, but it's actually, you've got to find your holding form for it. So when Serge and I were taking all these interviews, we got some amazing interviews from the transmasculine community and the people that we approach. And suddenly we had all this material and we just didn't know how to shape it or frame it. And then we decided to split things up into almost like little micro stories. And then it seemed to me that, and then sort of line them up thematically, so you have a sense of a journey of the whole thing. But it seems also that the text can work as a bit like a flicker book, that you could get lots of sort of rapid responses or rapid feelings or senses of identities or sexualities or perspectives inside one collection, and you don't need to stay in those spaces very long. It could just be kind of like a rapid fire. And within that, you could have different tones and textualities in terms of a story that makes you laugh, a story that makes you cry, a story where you feel, I don't know, sort of scared or concerned, etc., etc. So it just felt like a really pleasing form. And I think then within that, sort of in the way that audiences are changing and moving on. So also, Serge and I always wanted people to come into a space, whether it's a theatre space or a bookshop or a sex shop or, you know, a club environment where we've held these stories. Sometimes the communities that are coming in might have never been to the theatre in all their born days. So we also wanted to break up that sense of, oh, the big commitment coming to see a theatre show, you know, a 3-act play or whatever, that they could come and just sit and listen to a collection of stories anywhere. And we could also sort of make it accessible and inviting for people, and it wouldn't seem like such a big doozy or a commitment. And I think that's always worked to our favour. And that people come up afterwards and say, oh, I love that bit when, you know, you told that story about the toilet, or I love that bit when you heard the thing about the mum and the grandmother, or whatever it is. So people have these sort of flashes of stories, and so it sort of falls into the place of flash fiction a bit, which I, you know, Serge talks about small forms that he enjoys, and those are the sort of short forms that I also really, really enjoy. And can be very rewarding and fulfilling. They're quite hard to write, but they can be like rewarding and fulfilling. So it's always worked for us, and it's something that we'd always like to pursue, I think.
What I love about them is that it gives voice to many trans people or butch
Yes.
people as opposed to one,
Yes.
which is what we're more inclined to see in
Yes.
theater or film. So I think that's really important about that. When you watch
Yeah.
it, you feel it.
Yeah, and it feels like a little like the idea is a little chorus, you know. And also, I think it sort of ties in with the feeling that we have, and certainly when I was doing the Butch monologues, is to include like non-binary voices, trans voices alongside the Butch voices. So to have a collection that feels quite varied and rich, and it's just not one perspective. I mean, Serge and I have never been interested in one perspective, and just letting people kind of speak and say their authentic truths, which might be changing, you know, it might be constantly changing, and that's also really dynamic and exciting. And I think, you know, that's part of our sort of ethos really, is to be as inclusive and as sort of ranging as possible, so that you don't just get this sort of narrowing down, and that feels, you know, that feels like something that we're always interested in. And we're always kind of checking out with each other as well how things are mutating and changing for ourselves.
I would say that also was the same for Transfabulous, in that we wanted to
Yeah.
bring everyone with us. We wanted to
Yeah.
bring our best friends, our
Yes.
family, our partners, our future partners could come and find us there. It was about everyone was together in
Yeah.
this, and that an audience, even though would be very much interested in the subject, and it was sold out, but it still could be that the audience could be made up of anyone wanting to come and attend. And so yes, it was broader. I mean, in terms of trans community, thinking of it as broad, you know, and
Yeah.
inclusive. Yeah.
Speaking of queer families and um, I guess thinking about my interactions with both of you and having this sense of intergenerational storytelling and growth, I was wondering if both of you had someone in your youth that gave you that same thing, or maybe it was like a trans elder that you looked up to.
I mean, I had, in terms of performance terms, or like the language of perform, for me, it was, there was always Peggy Shaw for me, was a kind of absolute standout, and is still going, you know, mid-70s. So in terms of, I think I remember going down to see Belle Reprieve at the Drill Hall, probably in maybe the late 80s, and just sitting there and just watching that body in space, and watching a sort of a butch representation. And for me, it was like suddenly things were possible as opposed to things being impossible. So that for me, I literally got goosebumps watching that show. I'll never forget that show and the impact it had on me. So, and I must have been in my early 20s then.
I didn't really have much to go on before internet times, so it would have been yeah, not much at all. But I really was struck by Annie Sprinkle and Annie Sprinkle taking trans masculine lovers, and then the film Linda, Les and Annie was for me so wonderful for me to see. And I went all on my own, and there was practically a riot in the ICA cinema because people were wanting to smash the screen and the whole cinema up because it was such a shocking thing to see a trans man post-surgery with his phalloplasty trying to have the first sex date with his partner. Was for me the most significant, a real big significant moment for me. And so I do absolutely feel that I owe something to Annie Sprinkle for making that film.
You know what's wild? I did not know you were there, but when I was at university, I did my dissertation on Annie Sprinkle and these other few people. But I remember reading about that. That's like the second time that's happened. That's amazing. I want to hear more about that later, but we're not going to fit that in here. So I'm going to ask the last question, which is, for you, both personally, what do you think the future of trans revolution will look like?
Well, clearly, trans and non-normative and gender non-conforming people will take over the world ultimately. I mean, that's a given, isn't it? That is a given, because the current situation is not working for anyone. So yeah, I'm just, seriously on that sort of note, I think the revolution for me is all the things that we've been talking about. It does feel like it's inclusive, and there's a chorality of voices within that. And I think I hold on to something that Kate said maybe a couple of years ago, said that instead of people coming up to her or other trans people saying, oh, you pass, isn't it fantastic, you pass, it's like coming up saying you look so trans, and that's the kind of the best thing, or the sort of the accolade. So I think also that in ideology, or that in thought, seems amazing, but also I think that a chorality of experience, and I'm sort of over all the divisions and the splits. So non-binary people, butch people, gender non-conforming people, trans people, all coming in together. We've got to stop the infighting. I'm so over that. We have bigger paths to kind of to fall upon, and bigger places to go, really. So that would be my kind of revolution. World domination at some point.
As a trans punk elder, I'm not very keen on assimilation, even though I can obviously see that for safety and broader realities that you have to survive. But I do still have a hope that we could more be ourselves, and be ourselves from being small people, and through our lives and through to any age, in terms of being ourselves more without risk or threat. And that can mean also making more art and more stories being told, and the stories from history, and also to think of an archive. I mean, we've had discussions with E.J. Scott and the Ducky Lot about an archive doesn't mean a dusty old place where you put the dusty things. We are archive material. We are living archive material. Memories and connections, and I love the ones that Krishna, that you're saying, that we both had these intersecting points. We are living archive, but also we want to be able to be there for people to see us, and we exist. We're not going anywhere. We've always existed, and we're kind, we're open-minded, so hopefully we can. I don't know, it all sounds a bit naff now, but we can change the world. Yeah.
I've got heaps more questions, but I'll just, FaceTime you later.
Definitely. Cheers.
Okay, great.
Cheers, Tots.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Pleasure and a joy. Thank you.
Aww.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.